Thank you very much, Mandy. And it's a real joy to be with you all this morning. And to begin with, I wanted just as a prayer to use the first verse of From Singing the Faith 399, which is written by Michaela Youngson, who's currently Assistant Secretary of Conference, but she's also the person who introduced me to glass fusing. And I think you'll easily see a link between what she writes here and the whole hobby of working with glass. So let us pray. When deep despair casts out all light and hope is wearing thin, come, Spirit, dance with gentle grace, shine through the dullness we embrace, and make the colours sing. Amen. And that's a really wonderful thing about working with glass, is the interplay of light with glass and the shadows, and there's lots of stuff in there that's wonderful. So I wanted first of all to say that I guess in Knit and Natter, people come and talk about crafts sometimes and you think, oh, I fancy giving that a go. And, you know, you can dig around the house for a few bits and bobs that you've got, maybe go to a craft shop and spend, you know, sort of £5 or something, and you can have a go. You can't do that with glass fusing, because it is, I have to say, quite an expensive hobby. You need to invest quite a lot of money to begin with in the setup, though if you're lucky you might find that there's a glass fusing artist who is nearby to you, and people often run workshops, and that way you can go along and you can have a bit of a go, but be careful not to get hooked, because otherwise you will end up finding spending quite a lot of money, and it takes a bit of space as well. So what I've tried to do this morning, I am going to talk about my glasswork because it's a passion, but I have tried to talk about how this particular craft is woven into my Christian life and ministry, as Mandy said. So I hope that aspect of it will be helpful, because it will be transferable. You'll be able to think about how you use your craft within your life and ministry as well. Before, I'm going to share lots of pictures in a minute, but before I do that, I thought I would sort of live show you the things that you use. So what you need to work with first is glass, and I buy the glass in sheets like this that are already coloured. They are quite expensive, but they're just 3mm sheets of glass, and they are either opaque or there's transparent glass. Actually, I picked this up and didn't realise this is a nice one, because it's a turquoise blue, but it has a coating on it that makes it sort of shimmery. It's called an iridescent glass. So you can get sheet glass like that. And then there are some sort of special glasses you can get. So there's these really shiny dichroic ones. Apparently, these are a byproduct of the sort of space exploration, because scientists developed these really, really thin coatings to protect against heat, and then discovered you could use them on glass, and they're very good for jewelry. They're very expensive, so you use them in very small quantities, but that's dichroic. And then the glass can come in different forms. So sometimes you can use it as what's called frit. So that's chunks of glass, and that can go right down to powder. So for instance, on this piece I made here, it's difficult to see with the light in front of me, but there are some trees on it. And I've done that by putting powder on the surface and moving them around with a rubber tip. So you can sort of paint with powder. And you can also get what are called stringers, which are very long, very straight pieces of glass. And you can do things, you can do stripy things with them. So this bowl that I've made here, I started off by making sheets with long, thin stripes, and then I've cut those and arranged them to make those sorts of patterns. So you use different types of glass. To cut them, it's just a bit like tile cutting, really. I've just lost a simple scraper scorer thing that's got a diamond wheel, and then literally a sort of tile breaker. Of course, cutting glass in straight lines is relatively straightforward. Oh, there we go. There's the thing I used to score the glass with. So you score it, break it. If it's a straight line, usually it goes quite well. Glass doesn't like to go in curves. So cutting curves and circles is a bit more difficult. And after a little while, I have to say I did invest in a glass saw, which means that I can go round different shapes. So you cut the pieces, or you scatter the frit or the powder, you assemble them, I put them in a kiln. I haven't got a picture of my kiln, but it's about, I don't know, 2 foot square, something like that. And then the flat piece that comes out, you can then slump it over molds. So the ceramic molds like this. So you just sit your flat glass over the top, you put it back in the kiln, and it will slump down and take that form. Or you can use stainless steel molds like this, and if you put a piece on top, you'll see a picture of it in a bit, and you add heat, it will sort of come down in a sort of drape type thing. So that's the basic materials that you use. So having arranged your glass, then the main thing then is to decide how much heat you're going to apply, both the highest temperature. I generally work between about 730 degrees centigrade, at which stage you can still get some contours, or 795 degrees centigrade, at which stage the glass becomes completely molten. So working out how high to take the temperature and for how long to keep it at temperature. And you always have to cool it very, very slowly, because otherwise the glass cracks. So that's part of the technical sort of know-how that you learn. But the most exciting thing for me is, first of all, having the vision of what you want to make, and then how to make it out of glass. Because as I've shown you, I've got all sorts of different forms of glass I can use. But if somebody says, as they have done, I'd like a minion, you then have to work out how to make a minion out of glass. And for me, that's a really exciting part. And then how I can use it and give it away. So I'm just going to share my screen now to be able to show you some pictures. So this first one, this is beautiful, beautiful work. And this is by Mickey Youngson, who was gracious enough. About 10 years ago now, she had a sabbatical and I went to stay with her, and she allowed me to play with some of her glass. I'd no idea then how expensive it was, because I did break a few sheets before I managed to do what I wanted to do. And this collection that she made this for the Joint Public Issues Team Conference. And it's to display aspects of climate change and the way we're despoiling the environment. So there you've got the sort of, in that front bit, you've got sort of desertification and global warming. You've got bleaching of coral forth along. You've got commodification, everything with barcodes. You've got melting ice and so on. So that's beautiful pieces by Mickey. So it's lovely to call her a friend, and I'm very grateful for the gift that she gave to me. In terms of illustrating about the heat, this is what I mean, that the piece with the dove, that's a piece of glass that's been covered with powders. And then on top of that, I've put some white pieces of glass. Now, if you heat glass to about 795 degrees centigrade, it will just become a uniform 6mm thick piece. That's the thickness glass wants to be, 6mm thick. So whatever you put, if you heat it that high, that's what it will become. But if you only take it to 730, then the bits that you might put on top will keep their shape. That's what's called a tack fuse. So the glass just becomes tacky enough to stick together, and the edges sort of round over a bit, but it stands out. It's three-dimensional. Whereas on the other side, those coasters you can see, I've started off with 2 layers of glass, so they're already 6mm, and then I've added bits on top, but I've taken them right up to 795, and you can see that they have fully fused then. So that's the difference really in the heat. And then these are examples of how you can use some different molds. So on the one top left, again, I've done another version of that dove on a flat circular piece, and then I've put that into a sort of ceramic bowl mold and slumped it down. The one with hope is like a lovely S bend. So you put a flat rectangle and again, it slumps into that, stands up, is beautiful. And then these handkerchief vases are just some little handkerchief candle holders, sorry, are some gifts I made for the district team last year, because they're quite simple. You just cut a square of glass, and cutting glass squares is easy. And I've sprinkled them with powders and various other bits, and then put them over that stainless steel former, and they've just slumped down into those lovely forms. And here's an example of a piece sort of being made. So the top left hand shows the piece in the kiln, made from all sorts of leftover pieces, just again sort of cut and arranged, quite loosely cut in that case. Then the next one along, you can see how it came out of the kiln, 6mm thick, not a perfect circle, bit wobbly around the edges, but I was quite happy with that. And then it's sitting on top of the ceramic mold. And then the bottom one shows what's happened when I've heated it again, and it's just slumped down. So what you're now seeing is our fruit bowl. One of the interesting things, and one of the things you can catch out is some glasses are a different colour when they're raw from when they're cooked. They're called striker glasses, and they can catch you out. So if you look at the yellow band, you will see there that there's a few pieces that are a lot darker than anybody with a sense of colour design would have actually put in there. That's where I've thought a leftover piece is yellow. And when I've actually heated it up and it's come out, it turned out that it was an orange or red striker. So that's something that can catch you out. I have to say that glass fusing isn't a particularly environmentally sustainable craft, I'm afraid. It does involve raw product and it does involve heat. But one thing I do love about it is that you don't waste a scrap, and I really mean a scrap. And I have a lovely book which shows you all the things that you might be able to do, all the projects with the leftover pieces. And so here's one of the favourite things I've made. You make it by making all these little cairns of glass, going up from reasonable 1 centimetre square to the tiny bits on top. And you slump them all down, heat them, cook them all 795 degrees, and whoosh, it makes that really rather beautiful sort of dotted dish there. And I did something similar with these crosses as well. So again, you can draw the pattern out on paper and you can make your little piles of glass cairns and melt them down. So nothing is wasted, and I really do like that. So in terms of the uses to which I employ glass, because I've got hardly anything left in the household at all, one of the things I love to do is to make personal gifts. And this is where the ingenuity comes in. So, my friend Laura really likes clangers. So it's, how do I make clangers out of glass? Well, there's my version of a clanger. And then I was stationed in Leicester when Leicester City Football Club won the Premiership. And my friend Jo, one of my running friends, she was a passionate football supporter. She is a passionate football supporter. And I really wanted to make something to celebrate that for her. And to be quite honest, I can't even remember how I made that now, but it involved some plate glass cut into circles. It involved some paint. So I was happy to make that. Here's some other examples. The former Bishop of Dudley was a beekeeper, and when he moved to be Bishop of Norwich, I wanted to make him something to celebrate that move. So I made just that single honeycomb. Now I'll let you into a secret here. You'll see some things that have delicate pictures and also words, and people say, "Oh, how do you do that?" Actually, those are the easiest bits to do, because you either buy or print out on your printer decals, like you can use in ceramics. A lot of our ceramic plates and dishes will have been decorated by having printed decals that you simply slide onto the glass, and when you heat them up, it transfers onto the glass and is permanent. So that bee is not my artistry. That's just been cut up, stuck on like I think of them as like those, those semi-permanent tattoos you had as kids. You just slide it off the paper onto the glass, and it makes that beautiful thing there. And then this other thing is a mobile that I made for a friend I met in my first appointment. She's married to a sheep farmer. So you've got there the sheepdog and the little sheep, and she runs, and they'd had a holiday in Canada, and she loves music and things. So I love doing those sorts of things, of designing things. This was a present for my husband, who's very involved in issues of justice around Israel-Palestine. And he's been to rebuild a house that was demolished by the Israeli Defense Force on the West Bank. And he's also been a couple of times to be a witness to the olive harvest, because if the Palestinian villages in the West Bank have people witnessing there, it makes it less likely that they are going to be subject to an attack or other sorts of persecution. So it was quite late in the day in December when I thought, oh, I haven't got a present for Neil. And so I decided to make the separation barrier in glass. And there it is. And I've tried to imitate, you may have seen pictures of the wall, for instance, where it goes around Bethlehem. It has all sorts of amazing graffiti on it. So I've added some of my own. And last year, I added to that a nativity scene that would go round it. Though I have to say, my magi I can't look at those magi coming round the corner of the wall without thinking of Daleks. So that's maybe not the perfect design, but there you go. And this last piece is one of the pieces I'm most thrilled with, really. Last year's youth president, Phoebe, came from our district, and her theme was God's World, Our Home. And so mainly using paints, paints are glass powders in a suspension. I made this candle plate. So the idea is that you can put candles around the edge of the world to pray for it. So gifting, and I'm sure you lovely crafty people give lots of the things that you make away. Then one of the other things I've done is use glass for a bit of campaigning and craftivism. I'd include Mickey's pieces on climate change in this. They were making a political and faith statement as well about care for creation. These angels were part of what I made for a campaign run by Deacon Tracy Hume in Newcastle a few years ago. It was campaigning around changes to universal credit, and it was called Be an Angel. It was run at Christmas, and you sent it off to your MP and things, asking them to be an angel and support changes to universal credit. And then more recently, you may also have heard of the campaign calling on the government to reset the debt for people in poverty. It's now even more important for those who are suffering from poverty due to the pandemic. So my MP got this to stick on his Christmas tree, a reset the debt Christmas bauble. I don't often sell my glass. I much prefer to give it away. But when we were all in lockdown during the pandemic, I decided I wanted to do some fundraising for All We Can. Because as you'll know, the fact that we were locked down meant that charities did suffer quite a lot because all the fundraising events had to be cancelled. So I took a rainbow theme and made as many different things as I could think of. It was quite efficient on glass because cutting strips is, you can get a lot of rainbows out of if you use strips. So you can see things there that I slumped to make shapes. My favourite verse in all hymnody, I think, is I trace the rainbow through the rain and know the promise is not vain that morn shall tearless be. So I was able to make a few pieces with that. I made soap dishes. I made a piece with leftover scraps that you can see. And I didn't sell this piece, but I also gave a glass rainbow to our local Methodist Home for the Aged, Engelberg, round the corner. So that was something I really enjoyed doing lockdown. And I was thinking somebody might say, how much did you raise? I don't actually know, because I didn't strictly sell them. And what I did do was I asked people if they would like them. And I invited the first person to show an interest to receive the gift and make a donation to All We Can. So I don't really know how much came from that. Another thing to do with glass is to enhance worship. So these pieces I made fairly early on as I grew to know my hobby. I'll let you into a secret. This is a bit dangerous since this is being recorded, but at a church that I was at, they had the tradition of dressing the Lent cross, and they put various symbols. I thought these symbols were looking a bit tatty, but I didn't know whether anything was beloved of anybody, you know, whether it had been gifted by somebody's grandma or something. So I decided I would just gift something different. And so we made, I made some plaques that ran through the Sundays in Lent. And each Sunday we added another plaque to the cross. So you can see there the Palm Sunday one, the one that I think Bob will like. I think that's very diaconal, the servant, the washing the feet one. Here's one for majesty and one for betrayal. And you can see there an example of the servant one hanging from one of the arms of the cross. This took on an extra story because when the lovely church steward who helped me so much in displaying glass, when he was taking down the betrayal plaque, he accidentally dropped it and it broke. But another good thing about glass is that, you know, you can repair it. So I fused it onto a back piece. But of course, I couldn't completely get rid of the cracks, but then it made a whole new piece of its own, because it was quite appropriate to me that the piece that marked betrayal was now deeply cracked. That seemed to add to the whole narrative. So, enhancing worship. Then I've been very happy, particularly during the pandemic, to use glass for pastoral reasons. The flames on the top left started off as a bit of an experiment. I wondered whether I would be able to make candle flames as Christmas gifts for all the supernumeraries in my district. But I quickly worked out, I think we have about 80, and it was going to take a very, very long time to make 80. So I abandoned that, but I still had some prototypes left. And instead, what I did with them was, around the season of Diwali, I gave them in. I belong to a running club in Wolverhampton, and so I have quite a lot of Hindu and Sikh friends. So I added the word hope to each one, and I gifted these candle flames to them around the season of Diwali, which was much appreciated. And also, it's not my most successful representation in glass, but the things on the right are meant to be forget-me-nots. And I fused those and added a magnet on the back. And then I sent them out to people who I knew personally who had been bereaved during the pandemic, for them to put on their fridge as a way of remembering people who had died. And I think I'd add, under this category, in the district, we did a missional project around Valentine's Day, and I made some more magnets, and each one of these says "You are loved," and then these were added to packs that went out with one of our food banks, together with some sorts of Valentine treats. So again, that was a lovely thing to be able to do. But the thing I'm most excited about overall is about being able to use glass for missional outreach. And this is where all things work together for good, really, because in coming to Wolverhampton and Shrewsbury district, I just happen to have been stationed to the historic centre of glassmaking in Britain, which is in Stourbridge. And because it's a historic centre, there is an international festival of glass every 2 years. And so when I heard about this, I thought, well, this is just ideal. So I worked with the local church, which is in the Glass Quarter, and they were really up for taking part in the Glass Festival. So I belong to a Facebook group, a couple of Facebook groups of fused glass makers, amateur fused glass makers, both in this country and also internationally, which mainly means America. And so I put out an appeal. I said, who would like to send a piece of glass bunting? I specified the dimension, 17 centimeters across the top, 10 centimeters depth. And people were just asked to gift it. They weren't going to get it back, but they got the chance to display a bit of glasswork within the International Festival. And as you can see from that beautiful poster that my friend Jules lent his graphic design skills to, we got over 200 glass bunting flags, and each one was a tiny work of art. It was so lovely to see how people had used this tiny canvas and done their own thing on it. So it was a real joy. And for me, it was just like Christmas every day, because in the run up to the festival, I was getting these little boxes, some of them from across the Atlantic. I couldn't wait to open them and see all these beautiful, beautiful masterpieces. So, oh yeah, there's one of my favorites. I just love that one with the seagull. Isn't that clever? And you can even see there's little fish swimming down in the sea there. And I was also able to do some a bit of workshopping. I go to something called the Methodist Summer Fellowship, and I did a workshop with the 8 to 11-year-olds there. And this participant, she wanted to make a unicorn. So we found ways of making a unicorn. And this is a shot from inside Amblecote Wordsley Church during the festival. This lady lives in London, but she'd come up, she's a glass fuser, and she'd come to see the bunting flag that she had contributed. And a wonderful property steward there went to Dunelm and got a whole load of curtain poles and strung them up from the edges of the church so we could hang the bunting over it. It was wonderfully inventive. So that was great. And through that, I then got a relationship with the person who organises that. And so 2 years later, she said, well, this time our theme is going to be placemaking. And we're going to do things, particularly some projects with refugees. So we did a project called Home is Where the Heart Is ? Because for a lot of people, their home is in a different place from where their heart is. This is particularly refugees and asylum seekers, but it might also include, for instance, people who, through age and infirmity, have had to leave the house they've grown up in and go into residential care. There's lots of ways in which people are not always in the same place as their heart. It turned out it was more difficult for people to make hearts, so I didn't get as many sent in, but instead what I did, those ones at the top are ones that people sent in, people who fuse glass as a hobby. But I cut lots of glass hearts and then took them to various places like the Refugee Mingle run by Wolverhampton City of Sanctuary, and gave people glass pens so that we got this wonderful collection. I took them to Methodist Conference as well, of hearts, and each one told a story. And so for some of them, we made story cards to go alongside the hearts. So you may have heard Julie Siddiqui. She's sometimes does Thought for the Day on Radio 4. She's a prominent Muslim feminist and female leader. And I came across Julie, and she did this lovely heart with a cup of tea for hospitality, and then home, salam, shalom, and peace around it. So lots of stories. And to top it off, we had a group called Songs of Sanctuary from Durham, who worked with my friend Sam, and many of the refugees who are part of that group are originally from Syria, came over with the government scheme, and together they have written and performed songs, and they came then to perform in the church in the heart of the International Glass Festival, which was just absolutely amazing, just a wonderful thing to do. And so my final thing came from this year, goodness, where are we? When I did another project to do with the pandemic, I invited people to contribute 12 words that they associated with the COVID pandemic. This was on social media using Twitter and Facebook. I didn't really know where I was going, but when I collected all the words together, it seemed to me that they fell into Stations of the Cross. Lots of this plaque here, words like furlough, daily briefing, frustration, key worker, social distancing, separation, rule of six, all new words that we learned and phrases during COVID. But also people gave words of resurrection, garden, joy, quiet, sunlight, rest, awareness, stillness, appreciation. So once I had these lists, they fell very naturally into 12 groupings. And so I made 12 plaques, 6 stations of the cross and 6 stations of resurrection. And then my husband used his creativity to make a display frame with chicken wire. And we put them outside the manse for people to come, tie ribbons to the chicken wire, leave comments, take a cross. And I had lots and lots of interaction that week, lots of conversation. Been a really lovely early way of helping people to reflect on the trauma that we've all been through and to reflect on it in the light of the Christian stories of both the story of Christ's passion, but also the story of Christ's resurrection. Where have been the resurrection fruits in the midst of the Good Friday experiences? I realise as I come to an end, Mandy, that you talked about me using glass fusing in prayer, and I do, but that's one thing this morning when I put it together, I sort of missed out. But I've put together the things that we've covered, which I'm sure, again, as crafters yourself, you will be able to identify with, using our craft for campaigning for social justice, for gifting, showing our love, contribution to worship, ways of mission outreach, ways of raising funds, and ways of expressing pastoral care. And that's me done. Thank you very much for listening.